Gotta make sure I'm shutting off the YouTube. Where is it? Okay, we are live. All right.
Okay.
So this week we are starting a new book. We are what is it on?
Art and Multitude by
Art.
Antonio Negri.
Right.
So
Okay.
this guy is a neo-communist. Um, he was in exile from Italy for a number of years in France. They eventually let him back in.
So he's a neo-Marxist. He's one of the guys that Jordan Peterson is always talking about.
Yeah, you could probably say that. Yeah. So this book is ostensibly about art and his philosophy of art, but but it has a lot more, much wider ramifications. So it is political as well as spiritual, and it's supposed to, in a sense, capture every facet of our human existence. But he focuses on art in the same way that we would focus in on an example to show something true in our lives, or it's like an analogy.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Okay.
Makes sense, yeah.
So we are doing a 4-part series on this, so it's quite dense. It's a very thin book, but very dense, and we're going to do the first 2 today. And so the first thing that he wants to talk about is the nature of representation. Artists the world over, and this is in fact pretty much the definition of artist, is somebody who takes the world, stylizes it, and returns it to the world, and then it influences the world, and then that re-influences the next piece of work that the artist goes and does. So it's a back and forth kind of thing. And you can see that this is how pretty much everything works, political as well as social connections and all that kind of stuff. You present something, and it's represented back to you, and then you adjust and keep on going like that in sort of a back and forth spiral of abstraction and representation. It's always never quite the same, and it's always based on reality, sometimes more or less, and it often changes reality.
Right. Okay. So just like sitcoms, media's drama, movies and drama, they kind of reflect and change the culture as they go.
Precisely, yes. So in that sense, the whole history of art, or sorry, I should say of art history as a discipline, has a bit of a problem from his perspective. So every work of art being different, could it be its own category? But then when we create our own categories, such as like mannerism, academic, Fauvism, Art Deco, that kind of stuff, they are all they're all sort of human creations, and they're arbitrary. They could be very different. So we're stuck with these arbitrary distinctions between art.
So the forms of art are arbitrary.
Yeah, okay. And the styles and all that stuff. They're arbitrary. They can range on any continuum from every single work of art having its own category to all art simply just being one category, and you can play with it as much as you want. So this sort of, for him, is a bit of a dead end. Because these lines are arbitrary, these dividing lines, there'll always be argumentation as to where you draw the line, where this particular thing fits in or not. So he's suggesting it's better to look, if you want to get the deepest philosophical depth out of art, you look at the world. And here's a Marxist phrase, in particular, the mode of production in which the art was created to determine the categories for the narration of art history.
And that's a better way to categorize art than the arbitrary ones that we have now that aren't defined.
Yes.
Well.
So it essentially shifts the burden of defining what's happening into the real world's mode of production at that particular time and place. It may change within a particular place and time. And
so he would say that feudal art is fundamentally different than capitalist art,
yes,
or slavery-based art.
Okay. Precisely, yes, he would say that. Now, in addition to looking at the time and place and the mode of production, he wants us to look more specifically at the struggles of the multitude concerning production. So what it is that you're trying to do. So in today's world, we are trying to appease the market. That's our mode of production. If you're successful, you appease the market and you make a lot of money. In the medieval world, you would have to appease the church. And if you appeased the church, you got lots of patronage and had a pretty decent life compared to if you didn't please the church. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. And
So art
that's
was based around was people were making art with that in mind, basically, or with that, or that was what was forcing them to make art in that way.
yes, it's the mode of production. It's the world that actually produces a struggle in an individual and in a group of people, and it's in that struggle that they find creative expression.
Which is what? Okay, does he talk about like ancient art, like cave paintings? Because I mean that's a hunter gatherer form mode
Yes.
of production, so
So
that
he
would
doesn't.
make
He
sense
doesn't.
for them.
Yes, it would. In fact, he doesn't go directly into them. He's at a very, very high level and philosophical
Ah,
abstraction. But yes, it would make sense to look at a cave drawing in terms of their mode of production being hunter-gatherer, or whatever else they may have done. They might have just been hunters, or maybe they've just been gatherers or scavengers, or they might have actually been sedentary. We don't know entirely in all cases. But in that struggle is what is happening, is expressed in the art. And for
right. It
him,
would it wouldn't make sense for hunter gatherers to make video games
it
or
certainly probably would not.
yeah.
Although today, I guess they could probably play video games, but no, in hunter-gatherer days, they wouldn't. No, it wouldn't make sense. Yes. So, looking at the struggle is the most important thing to look at from his perspective. Now, one of the, and we have lots of, okay, so we have hundreds of different struggles. Each and every one of us has our own personal struggles as well as our communal struggles. And one of the highest struggles that we all
Hey,
are facing today is the death of eternal, transcendent, immutable truth. He claims that this is one of the highest struggles that everybody has to deal with. He claims, to be precise, it got sick at the beginning of modernity, so about the start of the Reformation, or the Renaissance, pardon me, and it finally died just recently in 1968. Literally,
68 was the date.
1968. He's got it down to a year.
That's the
Um,
transcendental
the
moment.
that's its final death. It's been sick for a while, and at that point, he says we can actually say that it finally died.
Okay. Why is
Now,
that?
well, 1968 was sort of a worldwide revolution that was centered in France against the status quo. He believes that that was a major thing in the world. I mean, most of us don't think of it too much, but it's also about that time that we got off the gold standard. It was a major change in in culture as well as finance. The world changed a lot in 1968 and in those intervening years. So he wants us to say, anyway, it's not 100% clear to me why he would say it died at that moment. I mean, it might have faded away at that moment, or that was the last traces of any eternal truth that was there. It's gone now. However, we still live in a world that is factitious as opposed to true. And for him, factitious is the pure facts of the world. There's a tree here, there's a road there, there's this kind of stuff. There's no real truth or value in facts, but we put in the truth and the value to those facts. Does that make sense a bit?
We impute our own.
Yes. So a factitious definition of love might be that there's a certain amount of endorphins that are being created in your brain as a result of that result in a obsessive compulsive behavior directed at a particular individual. As far as that goes, that may be factitious or factual, but it sort of destroys the idea of love, doesn't it? When we talk about love, we're talking about more than just facts, and the truth of love has high meaning. So he wants to distinguish in a sense between what is factual and what is truth. Truth is a creation of the human mind, and it's part of our struggle to make sense of the world. But the sense that, and we've had this for a very long time prior to 1968, the idea that there is an eternal immutable soul or an eternal immutable truth out there. This is a Platonic ideal. He referred, it's the idea that there's beauty out there, there's truth out there, there's treeness out there, and that it's caught in the world and we see shadows of it. He says this was fundamental throughout Western culture for thousands of years, and it died. It's no longer there.
Right, that there was some essential truth for us to find.
Yes. So For him, no, it's not there. It's all we have is the truth of the factitious, which is a very poor, very non-meaningful. It's not. I don't even want to say it's truth. It's fact. Um, it's it. It doesn't. It's there's no real value in the facts.
It's devoid of meaning or purpose.
Precisely. Yes.
Right.
So this confrontation that we have with reality, that there is no meaning to it, that there's no reason for it, that it's not there, that this is the thing that science sort of creates for us, and is difficult to take. No one of us wants to just be like a robot. We search for truth. We search for meaning. And he says this is all a lost cause.
So it's very postmodern.
Well, that's where he's going to get into the difference between the modern and the postmodern. So we in a sense have recreated the world, both literally and figuratively. Literally in the sense that there's nothing on Earth that has not been touched by humans. So we talk about nature as getting closer to nature, and he says, well, that nature that we're talking about getting closer to, it's a park. It's got trails. It's probably been polluted. I mean, any water stream in the world has now got little particles of plastic in it. So there's no real world anymore. The factual world is not real. It's already been abstracted and stylized to varying degrees. So if you live in the city, clearly much more than if you live in nature. And in other words, we've killed the real world and we've turned it into something that is different. It's a factitious world, he says, and it's a work of art. So in one sense, we are all artists all of the time because we are able to take the world and stylize it to our own ends and our own needs. This is an artistic endeavor. It's a struggle. That's why he says that this struggle for survival, in which we change the world, is a work of art in and of itself.
This kind of reminds me of Palia. She thinks of the world as a delusion, but he's saying we're just making art our own out of nature.
Yes, we are making. Yeah, okay. In that sense, yes, they are probably there's some connection to them. Yeah, and in the sense that she also sees this as a work of art that is much more interesting than just pure nature. Yeah, I guess They have a certain similarity there. So the new modern human-made artificial work of art that is the world has been abstracted from the formerly divine and natural world. So where we believe that we had nature, real untouched nature, and where we formerly believed that God was everywhere and these ideal forms were there, both of these are dead. They don't exist. And his claim is that there are some people out there who continue to search for these truths which don't exist, and some who surpass these truths or go beyond them. And by the way, he's not alone here. The notion of the death of transcendent truth, Nietzsche would have said God is dead,
right,
and has forced us to become, in a sense, materialist. He's not unique in saying this. He says it unique in a unique way. He's tying it to art. Mm. So the modern struggle is with the death of transcendent truth, and has left the modern individual searching for truth and meaning in the world. But it's a lost cause. They won't find it.
It can't be found.
It can't be found. The postmodern individual, by contrast, accepts that there is no truth or meaning to be found, but rather that they themselves must add, recreate, or re-abstract it in the world.
Right. So the kind of create your own purpose, you create your own meaning idea.
Yeah, exactly. Because if you don't, you got nothing.
Yeah. So you got it. Yeah. Right. So you have to make it yourself.
Well, yes, unless, of course, you believe that you can find it somewhere. So there are lots of cases where people try and find it. So they try and be all that they can be, for example, or they have to discover who they are, that kind of stuff.
Find yourself.
Those are examples of a very modern way of thinking, which he says will lead to dismal failure.
Now, this is kind of interesting. I'll like the post. A lot of people talk about the difference between the pre 68 left and the post 68 left is that they kind of turn inward and to look at themselves and to try to discover themselves or find inner peace instead of finding a transformational trying to find transformational change of the self in the psyche rather than of the world.
Yeah, I think he would say that's still a very modern thing, because you're looking for truth. You may try and find it
Yes.
in yourself,
Okay.
but if you're
Okay.
finding something, if you're looking for something, you're lost. You're not going to find it.
So these
That's
people are all lost.
These people are all lost. Yes, and it may be a good
I agree.
thing in a sense because it keeps people working. It may be good for capitalism in that sense. People are always looking for happiness, but they'll never find it. It's a very modern notion. They'll keep finding for meaning in their work, but they won't find it. They'll just claim they do because other people say that. But in that sense, they're also lost.
Or
And this, go ahead.
yeah. People trying to discover their purpose. This
Mhm.
idea that there is some purpose you are meant to have,
Yes.
or some role you're meant to fulfill in capitalist society,
Yes.
which is absurd on the face.
Yes, and I think he would say that too. So modernization's goal is, in a sense, to achieve its essence, as if there were an essence,
Right.
right? The whole notion of an essence, it's Platonic in a sense, maybe even pre-Platonic. We've been stuck with it for a while. Uh, but if you accept the notion of an essence, you're a modern for Negri, and you are destined for a futile search for something that does not exist.
Right. So he's saying essentialism is a key characteristic of modernism or
Yes,
modernity. It's interesting
exactly.
because modernism claims to be the rational scientific.
It does. And he says that's in fact right. That is what science has done. It has taken away the meaning. So science starts with a type of essence. So you have objects in the world, such as electrons, protons, neutrons, quarks, or whatever. You have real trees. But we have imposed that on the world in a sense. When we use language to describe these things, when we create theories to describe what they do and how they function. And to a certain degree, there might be some factual truth there. But to say that electron A moved from position XYZ to position XYZ1111, so what? It's you got to add something to it in order to create the meaning. And he's saying that the modern outlook, the scientific outlook, is destroying that meaning. And he's not alone there. Lots of postmodern authors, Jean Baudrillard specifically, also
Baudrillard.
Baudrillard, yes. He likes to talk about that all the time. That's the problem with modernity. Yes, it can get us a certain factual knowledge that is very useful for building and making cell phones and bridges, but it gets bogged down. It fails to give us any real meaning. The meaning we have to put into it, and there is where the postmodern individual comes in. They put in the meaning. They don't find the meaning. They create it for themselves. So what he claims is that a modern person cannot understand life. Only a postmodern can give life meaning as self-creation and or as self-determination. So remember, self-determination is a little different than self-discovery. Self-creation, again, is very different from finding yourself. That fundamental difference is the difference between the modern approach to the world and the postmodern approach to the world.
Now, does he differentiate his approach from orthodox, Marx and Engels writings?
If he does, it's not in this book.
Okay,
This
no.
is, yeah.
He's just kind of adding to it and adding some postmodern flavor to it, I guess.
Yeah. So he also wants to point out that postmodernity is not a return to something else. It is going beyond modernity. It's in fact modernity without the modernization. It's the recognition, but not acceptance of the truth of the artificial abstracted world. So you're accepting, you in a sense have to accept that there is no truth. You have to come to this conscious conception and conviction that it really is not, there's no reason for any of this. It's sort of like a dark night of the soul. It's you've reached a point in life where you really question everything, and then you can stay stuck in that by avoiding it, and you keep on searching, staying modern, or you can enter the postmodern world where you realize that you have to create something.
Right. You just accept it and you move on to create the world around, create your own meaning.
Yes, and that we'll cover that in the second session. But
that very much scares conservatives.
Oh, it does, and we're going to see why it does in a moment. Yeah, but if you can imagine, if you have a certain truth that you hold dear, if you have a guiding principle in life, and you're essentially having to come to the conclusion that that was a waste of time. You've invested a huge amount of your life following this cause or this this movement or this idea, or basing your life on some moralistic standard, and it was meaningless.
Yeah, right.
It's a very hard thing to take for a lot of people, and so not everybody can actually do it, but anybody can do it, but most people may not actually do it. Does that make sense so far?
Yeah, well, yeah, it's something that they think brings stability to life and society.
Yes.
And that, yeah, it's some base that you need in order to proceed from.
Yes. Okay, and that's essentially session 1.
Okay. That was quick. That was good.
Yeah, it seems to be going a little faster here. It's a little bit less controversial in a sense. Because
well, yeah, I was there for the meeting, and there was a lot of, I think, confusion with some of these concepts.
Yeah, okay, so if you see anything that doesn't make sense, feel free to question me. So in the second one, we look at, it's called the Sublime and Collective Work. So these are 2 chapters within the book. The emotion of the sublime is what we cover first. So, whoops, sorry, I just moved around some stuff here. So again, the modern can be overcome and surpassed, but only in the postmodern. And the postmodern always begins at the limit of the modern. Limit literally means physical and intellectual limit. At the moment, and it happens also at the moment when despair is greatest. Now, despair has a very precise meaning for him. He bases it on Kierkegaard's notion of despair, which means it's not depression. Okay, despair is a philosophical category. It's not a psychological or biological condition. So, in the sense that a person who's in despair and depression might have a chemical imbalance in the brain, or there might be something else like physically wrong with them, despair is more of a choice. It's an attitude. It's an attitude towards the self, in that you want to get rid of something about yourself. There's something about you that you don't like. And the idea is that in order to be human, you've got to be, in a sense, you either have to experience everything or consider everything that it could mean to be human. But if you focus in on one thing only in your life, if you dedicate your life to a single thing and dedicate like everything you do towards that, you're blocking out an awful lot.
You mean like focusing on the thing that you don't like?
Yeah, well, okay, there's 2 aspects to that. So first of all, there's something you may not like about yourself, but it's more than that. You may want something so badly that you forsake a lot of good things in you. So people who are super successful through their own hard work because they've dedicated their lives to a cause and become rich as a result, or been very successful and become famous. The price that you have to pay for that is usually in other factors of your life. And insofar as you're doing that, you're giving up a part of your life. So you're more than just who you are. You are, more than just your job. You are also connected to your family, to your community, to your interests. You throw all of that away or sacrifice all of that for a particular chosen cause.
To become great at something, at one
yes,
thing.
Yeah. You may in fact be successful, or you may not, but you are in despair. Because despair, again, is this attitude that you want to get rid of something about you. There's something you don't like about yourself. So you may wonder, so as an example, some of the highest paid people in the world tend to have a lot of personal problems, possibly because they're so dedicated to their jobs or their business or whatever that they forsake the relationships that are necessary in order to have a successful relationship with a significant other or with even their friends. When that happens, that's an example of somebody forgetting or wishing to get rid of a part of themselves.
Wishing to get rid of a when someone's focused on working, let's say working out, maybe,
Okay.
uh, then to the detriment of the rest of their life. So they're despairing the rest of their life, or they're just
Yes, exactly. And our world, our particular world, creates essentially by almost definition, by necessity, a lot of desperate people. Okay,
yeah.
so there's no need. Okay, so this is also to be distinguished from desperation of an that's imposed upon you. So if you're living in a subsistence society and you actually need to work a huge amount of time in order just to survive, that's imposed from outside. But what he's talking about here in the Kierkegaardian sense is desperation imposed from within. So you don't have to work that hard and be successful to be successful. Maybe to be that level of success you may have to, but to be successful in general with all the aspects of your life. And you choose to ignore some aspects of your life in order to focus intensely on this particular field that you've decided to go in. That is self-chosen desperation, as
So
opposed to...
it sounds like he's really just talking about sacrifice.
Yes. You sacrifice a lot for becoming the best in your sport or in your field. And he says, some people may need to do that for the sake of civilization and all that. But if you are doing it, you understand that you've got a certain mental illness there. You hate a part of yourself and you want to get rid of it because it's in the way of something else that you want to get.
Okay, well, what about the argument that you're sacrificing now, maybe sacrificing your family or sacrificing your relationships now for future, so that the gains you get in other areas will make it so that you can have a better
Mm-hmm. So,
relationships later, because
yeah.
of financial freedom that
So
you might create.
that you might create is important. So yes and no. It depends a lot on whether they're imposed from without or you do it on yourself. When you do it on yourself, that's a personal choice. That's philosophical desperation. When you're doing it because you're on a desert island and you need to create a hut for the sake of your survival, and you forsake the rest of your family for that, that's outwardly imposed. That's a natural desperation as opposed to philosophical. You
All
may
right,
be
so the reason you're doing it, or your ideas for future gains, don't really matter. It's just the fact that you are sacrificing something in the present to focus on something else.
yes.
Okay.
That makes you a desperate person from his perspective.
Okay.
It's a choice that you make, and it's not usually a mentally healthy choice, even if it may be a financially successful choice. It's also
right.
It's also tends to generate a poverty of experience. So, for example, superstar athletes that train 8 hours a day and sleep and drink their sport, or maybe even 18 hours a day, they're missing out a lot on life.
Right.
So are top performing CEOs who spend all their time at the office. They're missing out on a lot of life. They may think they can buy certain aspects of it at certain points in their time, but that's a poverty that's chosen.
Okay, interesting.
Mm-hmm. So the modern world, moving from the modern to the postmodern, you implicitly understand that there's this despair. You're facing up to your despair. And when you do that, you see the world. You see the limits upon your mind and on the world. Okay, so sorry, I'm just looking here. So at this point, you have an option of ignoring this fact that there's no meaning out there, that everything that you've been working for is meaningless, and you can ignore that thought and just continue on believing it as an act of faith and defiance. or you can accept those limits as merely obstacles to be overcome. So getting back to the notion of eternal truth, when the impossibility of eternal truth is grasped, and when the meaningless of the world is apprehended, the limit of the modern becomes an obstacle to be overcome. And it's not overcome through reason, but through imagination. So every one of us as individuals, we have sensibilities, we have categories of thought, we have prejudices. These are like the mental blocks that determine who we are. They're always given to us from the outside world. You are, in a sense, created by the world you grew up in and you live in. But when you see them not so much as limits, but as obstacles to overcome, your imagination has passed through the outside imposed prison that has encompassed your brain, your mind. Does that make sense? Now, pardon?
Say that again.
Okay, let's try it from a different perspective. Okay, well, no, let's say it again, and then I'll try it from a different perspective. If your mental blocks are created, your prejudices, the thought categories are given to you in school, for example, and in the very language you use, your sensibilities, what's considered acceptable and what's not considered acceptable in your society, all of these things put together make you who you are.
Yeah.
But if they're unreflected, if you're not thinking about them, you never grow beyond them. You need to grow beyond them if you want to change the world, if you want to move from the modern to the postmodern. If you want to, if when you realize that the meaninglessness of the world, you can again react by rejecting that truth, or you can accept it. By accepting that truth, it requires a certain amount of imagination to dream beyond the boundaries that have been imposed upon you from outside. This is a new self-created vista looking out.
Okay.
So another way that he was looking at it was the notion of the sublime. So the sublime, it's an emotion, and philosophically, traditional philosophy recognizes two kinds of sublime. The natural sublime, an example of this would be Martin Luther's thunderstorm. So when Martin Luther was a young man, he was walking through a field and during a rainstorm or a thunderstorm, and he got scared to death of this thunderstorm. He prayed to God, said, I'll dedicate my life to you if you let me live through this thing. He was like literally scared to death. And he survived, and he dedicated himself to God, created Lutheranism, and rebelled against the church and all that kind of stuff.
Because he survived the storm.
Well, the story goes it's because he prayed in that moment when he thought he was about to die. God answered his prayer, and he committed to this. He felt that he had been in close contact with God in that natural phenomenon known as a thunderstorm. It was sublime. It was terrible for him. The sublime is a terrible thing to have happen to you, but it leads to an awesome thing. Awesome in the traditional sense, meaning it's full of awe. So sublime is both a terrible and an awesome experience, and it moves in that direction.
So something something awful could happen to you in life, and then because of you emerge out of it better for some reason, then that's sublime.
That could be an example of sublime. I mean, you'll see there's another factor that goes into it, but that's a natural sublime. He wants to also talk about the mathematical sublime. So if you're familiar with Johann Kepler's laws of planetary motion, apparently when he was writing this, he spent his entire life doing a calculation that we can do on a computer now in seconds, and the calculator in maybe a couple of minutes. But at that time, not having done this, he was the first to have done this as far as we know. And he could see the hand of God in the world in a way that nobody else had been able to do. The authentic beauty of the calculations showing something about how planets move around the sun and each other was awe-inspiring for him. It was a terrible thing to know that he knew something that nobody else knew, and that it could die with him, for example. And it was an awesome expression that, hey, he touched the mind of God. This was a sublime moment for him. But Negri would like us to introduce us to what he calls as the ontological sublime. Now, ontology is the study of nature, of the nature of being and or existence. So your sense of being, again, is delineated by all your subjectivities, your thought categories, and your prejudices. When you recognize these limits as only obstacles, you are in the ontological sublime. So if you can imagine, this is how life is supposed to be, the capitalist world that we have. But suddenly your mind discovers, no, that's not true. It could be different. You have entered into a sense of the ontological sublime.
So every Marxist realizes that it could be different. So is every Marxist sublime?
May have experienced a sublime moment, yes. So a sublime moment isn't that hard to achieve. I mean, we probably have several in our lifetimes, but it's not enough. All right. So you can experience a terrible recognition that, hey, everything I thought was right was in fact not the case. And then you imagine it being different. That can happen to a lot of people. So anybody who's ever had a religious conversion or a loss of faith, they've had a sublime moment. Right? It's a terrible thing, and it's an awesome thing at the same time.
Yes.
So the way you see it is like you had this prejudice, and suddenly the prejudice is lifted, and the world looks very different. You had these set of thought categories. One of them is destroyed because you realize it's not really valid anymore, and so the world appears different. Or sensibilities. You thought, you thought that money was the most important thing in the world, and suddenly you think maybe it's not. The world changes. That sense, that feeling that you get at that moment when your mind has experienced playing in a different world that doesn't exist, but only because
I just lost you there. Hold on. I can't hear you. What the heck? Might be me again. I don't know. Hey. Shush. Say something. No, I can't hear you. What's going on here? Panasonic speakers. Try again. Nope, still nothing. Oh my god, what is wrong with this thing? No. No. Yeah, I can't hear a word. What is going on? Shoot. One sec. Unmuted mic. Can't unmute your guest. Is their mic isn't connected? It says your mic isn't connected. Still says your mic isn't connected. Here, try try leaving again, maybe resetting. Shoot. Dum dum. Hmm. Hmm. Hey. Hey, down. This is weird. Very weird. All right, Jeff is restarting his computer. Okay. Uh, I can hear you.
You can hear me? Okay.
Yep. Okay. Holy
We're back.
cow. Bit of a 10-minute break there. Where were we?
Okay, so the sublime is the moment when the imagination expands beyond the any one of or a combination of your.
Your audio just died again. It worked for 10 seconds and then it just cut off mid sentence. Can't hear you. Oh dear. Yeah, this was happening last time. Yeah, it says your mic isn't connected. So it's something's happening on your end. In addition to the issues that I had earlier, which were definitely my fault, but this is different. Yeah, it says. Oh dear.
It says it's working now.
Yep, I can hear you.
You can hear me.
Yep, we're good.
Okay. So the ontological sublime refers to changing essentially your thought processes, your prejudices, or your sensibilities in a way that allows you to play intellectually in a different world. It's an emotion. It often makes you feel really good. It's almost like a drug. Sorry, let me see here. Okay. However, this emotion of the sublime, the liberation of the imagination to run free. However, the sublime only shows us a possible path. It is only a potentiality and a very fun one to be in. But if it stays with the emotion, if you stay with the emotion, you actually are wasting it, like a drug addict who wastes his potential. The emotion must elicit action. It must create a new ethic. So remember, for him, everything is very social. When you envision a different world to play in, you are essentially creating a new ethic because you're expecting the world to change based on your new vision. This new ethic, though, is always self-created, self-reflected, and self-imposed, which makes it postmodern, not modern. Where a modern one would be imposed from the outside, this one is imposed on yourself, freely chosen, having been reflected on and self-created by yourself. Do you sense the difference there?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's like the difference between your ethics being dictated by God or the Bible, and kind of everybody choosing their own path, choosing their own way to mediate their interactions with other people.
Right, but it's more than just the mediation of your actions. You are demanding a change in the world. Okay, when you change the ethics from what the world has imposed upon you, and you expect the world to change, you are an extremely arrogant person. And he uses the word arrogant for a good reason. Only later do people call such people heroes or trailblazers when they've won. But at that moment, when you've had that sublime experience and you think that you know better than everybody else in the world, you are extremely arrogant. When you are the only one who's got a particular vision and the rest of the world is wrong, that is like classically the definition of arrogant. And you must accept that. You are alone in the world. You have created a new ethical norm, except it's not norm in the world, it's in your mind, and you want the world to change. The world is wrong, you're right. Do you see anything wrong with that? Well, clearly it can be abused.
Yeah.
The world.
It's going to make it difficult for you to get along in life if no one agrees with your new ethic.
True. Now, in most cases, though, the it's a subtle change or a small change in one of your many prejudices or one of your many thought categories or one of your many sensibilities. So it may not be that you change everything about you. It may just be one thing. So friends often separate and grow apart. At some point, one or two or both of them have had different sublime experiences that directed them in different ways. On the further extreme, I think he would think of Jesus or Muhammad as having been somebody who had an extreme sublime moment. I know in the Bible they talk about how Jesus went out into the desert for 40 days and fasted. When you're in a weakened state like that, it's much easier to have a sublime moment. And I understand Muhammad spent a lot of time in a cave. That must have been a sublime moment for him as well. In both of those instances, when they started to realize what their mission was in life, if you can imagine, they were extremely arrogant. They essentially said they had God on their side and everybody else was wrong. Abraham felt that way too when he was supposed to sacrifice his son Isaac at the call of God. Everybody else in the world would be wrong to say, hey, you can't kill your son. Like, there's an arrogance involved in that. But when you're right, you will be called a hero or a trailblazer or somebody who's changed the world in a sense. But it always starts with this arrogant moment. And if you're unwilling to accept that, then you've wasted the postmodern, or you've wasted that sublime experience.
Gotcha.
Okay. So again, remember how we talked about how in the social aspect, you have this vision, this new vision. It's different from everything the world has. It's different from what the world has. And it has to be mediated with the world. I mean, you're going to come in contact with the world. Some will fight against you. You may win some over. But in that winning over, as soon as you have disciples, it changes. It can't be pure. It's not your vision anymore. It's their vision as well. And if they've had a successful sublime experience, it mediates or changes your vision as well, and it comes back to you.
If they've had a successful one.
Yes. This is a disciple, right? So as you're changing the world, you start off with a disciple, somebody who agrees with you, essentially.
Right.
They see it. They may have their own sublime moment, or they may not. It might just be something that they see as to their benefit. At that moment, you've in a sense lost it. It's gone beyond you. And it will need to be changed. Sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. This is the process, that spiral of putting it out there and returning it back to you in changing form, back and forth as the world changes. This has to happen and continues to happen. So Islam today is probably very different than it was 500 years ago or 1,000 years ago, and certainly very different, I'm sure, than when Muhammad preached it. The same is true for Christianity. He doesn't see this as a bad thing. I mean, the religions in themselves would say, oh, you're getting away from the true message and all that, but he would say, no, there is no such thing as a true original message. It has to change over time in order for it to remain relevant. And that is what happens. So you start off as an extremely arrogant person thinking that you can change the world, and you will if you're successful, but it will change you also. The world will change you because you live in a social situation.
Right. You're not in a vacuum.
That's right. And if you think that you are in a vacuum, you're
a libertarian.
You may be, in fact, a libertarian. But probably not, because you change too. I mean, you have to deal with the world around you, right?
Right. Mm-hmm. But yeah.
Mm-hmm. And in this sense, this is what's happening. People, artists, live different lives. They sometimes even a bohemian life. So he talks about artists and living the bohemian life. It's almost necessary, but not in and itself sufficient. It's an indication that you've had a sublime moment and you're playing in a different world that doesn't exist or that you're trying to make come into existence. So both Jesus and Muhammad changed the rules of the religion at the time. I was seeing that there's a new series coming out, or maybe it came out a while ago, called Messiah, about how Jesus came back, but in the Muslim categories. Right? Like the Islamic system has the idea that Jesus is going to come back. And if he comes back and he's true to form, he will not be what Muslims think Muslims should be like, because the message has changed. The situation has changed.
Okay.
Right?
Based
So,
on the context, based on
yeah, based on the fact that religions need to change in order to stay relevant, based on the fact that somebody who's had a sublime moment, who wants to change the world, is arrogant enough to think that everything that is already in existence is wrong, or whatever it is wrong.
right. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a process of ever kind of
Change.
ever revolutionizing.
Yes.
Okay. Yes.
And that brings us to the end of the first or the second session as well.
Okay.
There you go. So 2 relatively short ones compared to Camille.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's good. Okay. Well,
we're only halfway through the book, so we can probably finish this one in 2 weeks, maybe 4 weeks, because we got 2 more sessions and they're 2 weeks apart.
the next session is next Wednesday, right? Not
Yes.
this one. Right. Yes. Well, if you're watching, check in with us next Wednesday night. Hopefully, we'll be able to do it then. And that'll be on the 18th, the day after St. Patrick's Day.
Oh, that'll be a party.
We'll see what kind of shape I'm in for that one. But yeah, okay. Well, thanks, Jeff.
My pleasure.
All right. See you next time.
Bye-bye.
All right. Bye. And